Hi, I'm Dana Perino in for Bill O'Reilly, who is on vacation. Thanks for watching us tonight. We begin with a breaking story. A shooting spree on the streets of Fresno, California that's left 3 people dead. Police say the suspect is an ex-con who had expressed hatred toward white people and the government and yelled Allahu Akbar as he was being taken into custody. And while both the FBI and Fresno police are saying it's too soon to call this terrorism, the Fresno Bee reports that the suspect's social media account quoted the phrase Allahu Akbar in a tweet.
One of our officers was traveling eastbound on Divisadero at Fulton when he saw a black male running southbound on Fulton. Immediately upon that individual seeing the officer, he literally dove onto the ground and was taken into custody. And as he was taken into custody, he yelled out Ali Akbar.
The suspect, 39-year-old Corey Ali Mohammed, was also wanted in the deadly shooting of a security guard outside of a Motel 6 in Fresno last Thursday. Joining us now from Los Angeles, Fox News chief correspondent Jonathan Hunt, and from Washington, Jim Hansen, executive vice president for the Center for Security Policy. Jonathan, take us through the day. What time did this happen, and how did they know who the suspect was, and how did they link him to that shooting from last week?
Well, first of all, this all happened in one terrifying minute this morning, local time, on the streets of downtown Fresno. Those 3 victims, all white men, shot in very quick succession. Now, they have this technology in Fresno, Dana, called the Shot Spotter, monitors that are set up around the downtown area and alert police to the sound of a gunshot. That's why cops were on the scene so quickly, and according to the police chief, that is why more people weren't hurt or killed in this incident. Now, tying him to the previous murder last Thursday at a local Motel 6, they had video evidence from security cameras of that killing of a security guard who, by the way, was also white. So they knew the identity of whom they were looking for in that incident. And as soon as they took this man into custody after today's shootings, they realized he was one and the same. 39-year-old Corey Ali Mohammed. Dana.
Jim, what do we... The FBI and Fresno are both, exercising caution and saying this isn't terrorism per se, but what is the line? When do they decide that it's terrorism or not?
It's up to their agencies when they decide to call it terrorism, but of course it's terrorism. The only question is which particular strain, and in this case it seems like there are 2. We have radical Islamic terrorism with his Allahu Akbar, and we also have black nationalism. And those 2 often are combined in prison, where this guy spent a considerable amount of time. We don't know if that's where he converted yet, and we don't know if that's where he learned this kind of hatred, but it certainly is a place where it metastasizes, and this is a situation where those 2 things combined are even more deadly.
Well then, Jim, would this be considered a hate crime then, at the very least?
A hate crime is a miniature form of terrorism. This guy was looking to create a black state. He was looking to kill white people, and he was doing so in the name of Allah. So you combine those things together. I don't care what particular terms you use. It is most certainly a form of terrorism, and it's something that the police and all the rest of our national security agencies, hopefully under President Trump, can now take their handcuffs and blindfolds off and take a good look at and try to keep us safe from.
Jonathan, we know that all of the victims were white. We also, as I understand, they were all random and they were anonymous to him. What else do we know about the victims tonight?
Yeah, just that they were all white men, chosen, according to the police chief, entirely at random by Corey Ali Mohammed. And just to pick up on Jim's point quickly, Dana, on this man's criminal background, we know that he has a criminal record involving weapons charges, drugs charges, false imprisonment, and making what the police chief called, quote, terroristic threats in the past. We also know that he has a history of mental illness, according to court records, with a, quote, substantial degree of paranoia. And while obviously police are very interested in him saying those words, Allahu Akbar, it's worth pointing out too, he wouldn't be the first person to invoke the name of God while carrying out a killing spree. Dana.
Jim, can I ask you about the police force? Because as I recall last fall, right before the election, there was a poll taken, I think it was by Pew, that asked Americans if they were worried that they might either be a victim of a terrorist attack or know somebody who was before the end of their lifetimes. And the number was higher than at any time since 9/11, especially in smaller towns. And if you look at a place like San Bernardino or Fresno, what do these local law enforcement officers need in order to help deal with these random assaults? But if you see something on Twitter, then can it trigger anything for these law enforcement officers to take any sort of preemptive action to protect people? I'm assuming not.
I think we need to go ahead and allow our law enforcement agencies to look where they know the bad guys are. Andy McCarthy coined and used a great phrase called willful blindness, where we avoid actually looking at what we know the problem is. It is Islamic terror. It is black nationalism. In this case, this guy was obsessed with Black Lives Matter and the other grievance-mongering groups that have pushed this narrative that the police are slaughtering black men in massive numbers. The facts don't bear it out. So we need to look where people are telling those stories and radicalizing people. We need to look at which mosques are preaching hate, and we need to allow our national security agencies to do their jobs as opposed to pretending this isn't the actual problem.
What's next then in Fresno that you hear from the local law enforcement, Jonathan?
Well, obviously they are questioning this man, Corey Mohammed, right now. The police chief says that they will learn a lot more from that. As you mentioned earlier, and as we have been mentioning throughout this, the police chief and the FBI have said that it is too early. In the case of the FBI, in fact, they've said at this point they are simply not calling it a terrorist incident, but they want to find out more. They will, as Jim was saying, want to go through all of this man's motivations, the black nationalism expressed on his Facebook page, the fact that he did indeed shout Allahu Akbar, which, as we know, is a phrase commonly used by Islamist terrorists. So they will want to dig deep into all of that. They'll also want to look, obviously, into his mental state, because as I say, court records do show he has a history of mental illness. All of those things will play into this, and all of those will be issues that the police now, as they interview him, will want to dig much deeper into before they give us a definitive answer on whether they believe, and I get Jim's point, but whether they, the police and the FBI, want to define this as an act of terror. Dana.
All right, and I saw that they are talking to his family, including the grandmother, so maybe we'll know more by the morning. All right, gentlemen, thank you. Coming up next, we go live to Georgia for the latest on today's high-stakes special election with big implications for President Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress. Don't go away. Race to fill the House seat of Tom Price. He's now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. It's being fiercely contested by both sides and viewed as a key test of President Trump's performance so far. For the latest, we go to Fox News correspondent Jonathan Seri at the headquarters of Democrat candidate Jon Ossoff in Dunwoody, Georgia, where the polls closed a little more than an hour ago. Jonathan.
Hi, Dana. There is a sense of cautious optimism here. Ossoff supporters hoping that he will be named an outright winner in today's special election, but if not, that at the very least he will be among the two contenders in a runoff election that would be scheduled for June 20th, Dana.
And Jonathan, I see some dancing in the background. Is that because, do they have any insight? I mean, the polls closed an hour ago. Do they have any indication of what the results might be, or they are just hopeful?
No, they are just hopeful. They haven't gotten any results just yet. What you see going on behind me is just a spontaneous outburst of dancing, but an indication of the cautious optimism that Ossoff supporters are experiencing here. You know, the Democrats have a bit of an advantage in the sense that even though there are 5 Democrats running in this race, Democrats really rallied behind Ossoff, who raised a record amount of money in this campaign, far more than any of the other candidates It's more than $8 million, has the backing of some A-list Hollywood celebrities, really drawing a lot of attention. Compare that to the Republicans, who have some well-known names running in this race, but Dana, they have a total of 11 candidates. So in addition to attacking the Democrats, they've also been attacking each other. So while the Democrats are hoping to avoid a runoff and decide the election once and for all tonight, Republican strategists say they actually prefer going into a runoff where it would just be a two-candidate race, presumably a Republican and a Democrat, but no guarantees. And in that case, they believe they would fare much better.
All right, Jonathan, keep us updated. Thank you so much.
Will do.
And joining us now with more on the implications from all this, pollster Frank Luntz. I'm so excited to have you in studio tonight because this is like that little snack that you get in between meals of your big elections. This is just like the special election that keeps your appetite whetted.
I go for buffets, so my appetite is always whetted.
Is that right?
This is fascinating to me because this is a tough district for Donald
Why?
Trump. It's a wealthier, better educated suburban district, a place where Trump did not do as well as Mitt Romney did. But intellectually, ideologically, it's perfect for Trump in terms of where people stand. Second is that you have Democrats all across the country actively participating in town halls. There was one that was held last night in Congressman Jeff Denham's district in California, very close to where that shooting happened. And they've come to protest. They've not come to ask questions. They've come to essentially disrupt. And then third is that so much money is flowing into this district that it almost feels like a presidential race, even though it's an off-year election. So you're going to have a high turnout, a lot of advertising, a lot of people involved, and I do think it's a legitimate bellwether for what's going to happen next.
Well, does it matter at all that he does not live in the district? He grew up in the district. He lives near the district. And that all this money has come from outside. I mean, does it really help him that Hollywood is behind it?
By the way you just put it, no. This is going to be an ad against him. I can just imagine the 30 seconds that they're going to use against him. But in an election, in the first election, no, it doesn't matter. Okay. What matters is he's got name ID, he's young, he's articulate, and he is the contrast that the Democrats are looking for. And also he's talking about issues. I don't think the Democrats nationwide have done an effective job at challenging Donald Trump. It's been all negative. There's been no sense of real policy.
Just like anger.
Issues. Just exactly. But in this district, he's had the opportunity, and he's been able to do the advertising thanks to the Hollywood money.
Well, then what's the issue that he's pushing that's working?
He's talking about health care. Okay. And Republicans ought to be nervous because Obamacare had significant opposition right up through the election. But it's actually at its highest level of support ever today. And that indicates that the Republicans are not communicating effectively what their alternative is, and the Democrats have been very effective in trying to politicize the issue.
But could the alternative be true? Have the Democrats raised expectations so high on this? He's not. Let's say he doesn't get to 50%. They go to a runoff. It's a Republican seat, and then the Democrats basically have egg on their face.
Fair point. If they can't win here, in a district that Trump only won by 1.5%.
Right.
And where are they going to win in these off-year elections? In 1993, Republicans won everything. The governorships, House races, mayoralships. They won everything. And that was a clear indication of what was going to happen in 1994. For the Democrats, if they want those dominoes to fall, they have to win here.
So President Trump got involved sort of Friday and then increasingly over the weekend and did some tweeting that probably helps generate get out the base.
Right.
Did a robocall, like trying to generate some enthusiasm because a lot of people don't turn out for special elections. How engaged does President Trump need to be in this race or the one that's upcoming in Montana in order to hold those seats?
It's important that he's engaged, but he has to start earlier. It's the same thing with health care. You cannot engage in the last 2 weeks or last week and expect to have the same kind of impact. Barack Obama was not just the commander-in-chief, he was the campaigner-in-chief. And he got involved in races like this weeks or months earlier. If Donald Trump wants to really leverage that grassroots support, which is unprecedented, then he has to start earlier in the process.
So for House Republicans, it might be kind of concerned about their races in 18 months. If they hold off Ossoff and they get the Republican in and everything, does it give the Republicans a little more confidence to think, okay, well, we should get behind President Trump's agenda. We have to get some points on the board and do so with a little more confidence that they're not going to be either primaried or lose their race to a Democrat?
And that's the point, that they have to work together. You have to repeal Obamacare, or the base will stay home. You have to get tax reform. And frankly, and I brought the talking points with me, they have to challenge these protesters. They are showing up on their own. They're not being paid to show up, but they're being organized by people who are paying the organizers.
Nothing wrong with organizing.
You're not done, Denham. This is Jeff Denham's district.
Okay.
Yelling at him, talk, Denham, talk. These are the official talking points, or you're not done, Denham. Since when do we not call a congressman or a congressperson by that title? Do you remember when Barbara Boxer said, I've worked a long time to earn the title of senator?
You will call me by that title?
Now the protesters are so uncivil, so disrespectful, and I think that that's going to backfire against the Democrats and help the Republicans, because in the end, the American people don't want yelling and screaming. They want you to get the job done.
Okay, zoom out and talk to me a little bit about bigger picture demographic changes in these suburban districts, because if elections are won in the suburbs, what kind of changes are Republicans and Democrats looking at in the next, I don't want to talk about 2018, I'm thinking maybe 5 to 10 years from now.
Great. I mean, it's whoever can get the working class and the middle class to vote for the same candidate wins.
Okay.
What has happened with the Democrats is that they've won the poorest voters and the multimillionaires, but that doesn't take them to 50%. Republicans can only maintain the majority if they can keep those people who voted for McCain and Romney, as well as those people who voted for Trump. And that is getting people with family incomes between $35,000 a year and $125,000 a year voting Republican, with about a 5 or 6 point advantage over the Democrats. They have created a working majority for the long term if they keep those people voting together. And I will tell you that budgets matter to them, national security matters to them, and health care matters to them.
How is candidate recruitment for the Republicans and Democrats? Because Ossoff is a young guy, 30 years old. He's sticking his neck out there pretty early.
But he's turned out to be a very good candidate because he speaks well, he communicates well. I'm not looking for the governors to run for the Senate. I'm not looking for the state legislators to run for the House. I'm looking at people who know how to communicate, who know how to explain to the American people where they stand.
Sounds like someone we know.
Who?
President Trump.
You got it.
Okay. I'm glad that I passed the test.
You got it.
All right, Frank, thank you so much. It was great to see you.
And it's great to see you.
Thank you. Up next, the Secretary of Homeland Security reveals his biggest fear about where a new terror attack in the U.S. could come from. Right back with segment tonight. President Trump making good on his promise to put America first. Today, he signed a double-barreled executive order marketed as Buy American, Hire American. It would add restrictions to the H-1B visa program for highly skilled foreign workers and would require government agencies to buy more U.S.-made products.
This historic action declares that the policy of our government is to aggressively promote and use American-made goods and to ensure that American labor is hired to do the job. It's America first. You better believe it. First, we will fully monitor, uphold, and enforce our Buy American laws, which we haven't done. Secondly, we are going to enforce the Hire American rules that are designed to protect jobs and wages of workers in the United States.
And in keeping with the president's goal to crack down on immigration abuses, the president also praised his Homeland Security Secretary.
Secretary Kelly, DHS, he has a message to illegal immigrants. He says a single DUI can get you kicked out of the country. Do you agree with that stance?
Well, I'm letting him run it. He's great. He's a great general. He was a tremendously successful general, and I'm letting him run it. But I will tell you, we've gotten tremendous criminals out of this country, and I'm talking about illegal immigrants that were here, that caused tremendous crime, that have murdered people, raped people, horrible things have happened. They're getting the hell out or they're going to prison. And so many towns and cities are thanking me because we have gotten rid of a burden that you would not believe. I mean, it is a serious problem and we never did anything about it, and now we're doing something about it.
How serious is the problem of our porous southern border? Just listen to what Homeland Security John Kelly said today.
When there is another terrorist attack in our country, if it comes from outside the country, up until 90 days ago, I would say that individual, as we would do the forensics on it, that individual or individuals get into the United States through the southwest border. I'm staying up late at night, every night, to try to prevent that from happening. But that's what keeps me up awake at night.
Joining us now to analyze, from Washington, Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, and from Los Angeles radio talk show host Ethan Bierman. Ethan, if I could start with you, because as I understand it, you think that actually the left would have liked the executive order on Buy American, Hire American today even more than the right.
Yeah, originally that's the case. The opposition to Donald Trump, our president, of course, has changed some of that. But of course, protecting American jobs is what the labor movement, the union movement, for a very long time was pushing. We had the Obama administration, we had the Bush administration not doing that. I mean, I fully support President Trump, particularly on this issue of the H-1B visa program, which has been so abjectly abused here in the United States, putting Americans out of work, damaging their ability to make a living. And so this is one thing I can finally say I actually support the president on.
Can you just give me an example of some of those abuses? Because you said I know that you've written a book and you talked a little bit about this. What's an example of some of that, just so that people watching at home can understand?
Yeah, so literally in the information technology industry, as wages went up to, let's say, $80,000 a year, the companies didn't want to pay that anymore. So they leveraged the H-1B visa program to reach out to other countries in the world, whether it's China, Pakistan, India, Belarus, and they would advertise for the job and hire somebody at $35,000 a year, saying that the American worker didn't want the job. That is an abuse of the system. They were supposed to pay market rates for the job, and they didn't, and it hurt Americans.
Okay, well, the U.S. Chamber today, Lisa, was sort of pushed back on it, basically saying that it would be a mistake to close the door on high-skilled workers from around the world who can contribute to American business growth and expansion, and this would be sort of maybe your typical or old school Republican way of looking at things, but the Republican Party under President Trump doesn't want to cede any ground on workers, and it was one of the reasons that he was able to flip those states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. What do you think?
Well, Dana, you're absolutely right. But look, I don't think that he's closing the door on highly skilled workers. All he's really doing is asking a few different agencies to essentially do a 220-day review to make sure that these visas are being given to higher paid and highly educated and highly salaried applicants. So, I mean, that's what he's doing. So let's see what they come up with in that 220-day window. But you're absolutely right. And this is the kind of message that won him states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And Dana, you work in communications. Look at the headlines across the country today, particularly in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a county that he took from Democrat control by 238 votes, a county that has traditionally gone Democrat in the previous elections, at a factory, Snap-on Tools, which is a Wisconsin factory. So, I mean, this is great messaging. This is the messaging that got him into the White House. So I think it's a net positive for the administration today.
Oh, you bet. You knew that I gave him an A for marketing when it came to Buy American, Hire American. That is all across the board. But way back in the day, we had the Clear Skies Act. Boy, the Democrats hated that. But it was called the Clear Skies Act, Ethan. Can I get to Secretary Kelly's comments? Because I did think that to listen to what a secretary of the cabinet, what keeps him awake at night, and he says it's the southern border, and that if there is a terrorist attack, it would come from somebody getting across that southern border. Ethan, what do you think?
That does not keep me up at night. We have 700 miles of fencing and walls already. We need to implement technology, not build a $20+ billion wall that won't actually work. Because here in California, even where things are walled off, the cartels use Ponga boats and land on our shores all the way up the central coast of California. So building a wall, sealing off the border isn't the key thing. Plus, it also happens to ignore, let's remember the Millennium terror attacks that were thwarted, thankfully, by our law enforcement agencies. They came down from Canada to attack LAX. They didn't come up from Mexico.
Lisa, well, I'll let you comment on that, but also wanted to get your take on the plea that Secretary Kelly has had in the last 2 days, which is to tell Congress, if you don't like the laws, then change the laws, because my job is to enforce the law. So let me just get your last word on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's smart and that's right. All the administration is doing is following the laws in the book. So if Congress doesn't like it, they need to change the laws. But in regards to Ethan's point, with all due respect, Secretary Kelly was general of the Southern Command. So this is a guy who is intimately familiar with the threats along the southern border. So I trust his judgment in this. And there has been reports of a Texas top law enforcement agency warning Texas lawmakers about the fact that individuals with known terrorist ties were apprehended at the southern border. According to the own Department of Homeland Security, a report that they issued, there were thousands of individuals at the southern, or that were apprehended at the southern border, that had ties to countries that were state sponsors of terror. So this is absolutely a threat at a time where terrorism is rampant and ISIS has a growing foothold across the world.
Ethan, last question to you. One of the things that Secretary Kelly pleaded with people was to say that to Congress, you've passed the laws, now I'm asking you to support our people. Do you get the sense that Democrats understand that the mood in the country is to support law enforcement, to support these Border Patrol agents and the ICE agents and what they have to do? Or do you think that Democrats will want to maybe come forward and suggest changes to the laws that they don't like?
Well, I think if they even suggest changes to the laws, it doesn't mean anything when the Republicans have total control in both the House and the Senate. But really, let's be blunt. Americans are, for the most part, happy to secure our borders. But what is happening under President Trump and Secretary Kelly is a deportation force. That's what's going on, especially here in the state of California. We have ICE agents posing as police, arresting people when they're dropping their kids off at school, breaking up families. That's not securing the border.
Well, I think that the administration would dispute that, and I'm sure, Lisa, you would too if we had time. But we've got to run. Lisa, Ethan,
thank you, Dana.
Thank you so much. Next on the rundown, a bombshell new book pulls back the curtain on the downfall of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. Plus, more palace intrigue at the Trump White House. What will happen to the embattled Steve Bannon? Ed Henry has the inside story in just a moment. In the personal story segment tonight, new developments around Steve Bannon's standing in the Trump White House and a shocking book released today about Hillary Clinton's failed presidential campaign. Joining us now with the details, Fox News Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry, author of the great new book, 42 Faith, the rest of the Jackie Robinson story. Congratulations on the book. All right, but there's another book that's out today. Tell me a little bit about it, because I've been waiting to see this.
Well, Shattered. It's about the Hillary Clinton campaign. This just in. Flawed candidate, a lot of advisors
bad messaging.
Fighting, bad messaging.
No one could tell why she was running.
Email server that was a disaster. No, in all seriousness, I do think there's a lot in this book that we already knew. Frankly, because of WikiLeaks, in real time, emails were coming out from John Podesta, which showed that they were fighting. They didn't know what the vision was. But I do think there is some new information, particularly about election night. I think it's pretty juicy stuff when the reporters come in and say that President Obama called the first time and said, where are we? Are you going to concede? And Hillary Clinton was dug in and wouldn't concede. And Bill Clinton, meanwhile, was saying, it looks like Brexit. I guess this is real, which shows you that this really was coming at them as a big shock. Bill Clinton, better than Hillary Clinton, I think, was saying earlier in this whole deal, you got to talk to these white working class voters. This could be bad.
See,
and nobody was listening.
I thought that was interesting in the book. So this is by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes. And they've basically talked to people on background so that their identities would be protected, but they got some pretty blunt talk. And I thought it was interesting to hear how many people were willing to say on that campaign that Bill Clinton was trying to make the case that they needed to do something different, but the people in Brooklyn were like, oh no, we've got this. We know exactly what we're doing.
And so he was ahead of the curve, but then on election night, he's basically saying, wow, this is Brexit. This is real. And that's interesting because Donald Trump was saying throughout the campaign, this is going to be Brexit 2.0. But I think fascinating as well is then President Obama calls a second time to Hillary Clinton. Where are we here?
Let's get this done.
And remember that John Podesta, the campaign chairman, was sent out to the Javits Center. You have crying people saying, hey, we're going to fight another day. This is not over. In private, President Obama was saying, Hillary, this is over. And her reaction to him is fascinating. According to the book, she says, I'm sorry, Mr. President, about your legacy. And I think that's
I'm not surprised by that, because I think that would be the first thing that I would have said too.
Not surprised, but I think it's interesting to me that her concern at that moment was about his legacy and him. I mean, wasn't this about the American
talking to
people?
A president who really he pulled out all the stops, and he and Michelle Obama really they really did. And it is true that whoever succeeds you will temporarily paint your legacy until history is able to deal with it.
And that night she probably assumed, okay, Obamacare is going to be repealed and replaced. Yet, not yet.
I also thought it was interesting that somebody on the campaign wanted her to give her first speech in Wisconsin, in the Badger State, and she gets overruled, and she never goes to Wisconsin and loses it by less than 2% of the vote.
And so, people mock the advisors. They gave all this bad advice. There actually was some good advice that was never heeded.
She did take it. All right, now, to the current White House.
Yeah.
Last week, Steve Bannon seemed to be on thin ice. This week, he's on more solid ground. What do you know?
What I'm hearing is that in Palm Beach over the weekend, the president spent a lot of time doing what he loves to do, dinner and kibitzing, golf, all of that, and asking people, what do you think? What do you think about Bannon? What do you think about Sean Spicer? What do you think about Reince Priebus? And I came away from that reporting out from some of the president's advisors that he wants to keep Stephen Bannon, thinks that he is a critical part of the team, but is very angry that Bannon has allowed, either has directly done it or indirectly has allowed all or a lot of the credit to go to him. And that the president was particularly upset about that Time magazine cover that made it like Bannon was the great architect. It called him the great manipulator.
Although I felt kind of bad for Bannon for that because he didn't come up with the headline, and I do think that the media was kind of egging that on.
But you also have to decide whether you're, as an advisor, and you know you've been there, whether you're going to cooperate with some of these profiles, whether you're going to feed some of these narratives.
Oh, that was the best advice I ever got from Dan Bartlett. Don't cooperate when they're doing a profile of you.
Just
like be
advice,
quiet.
Because I hear that the president...
And have your friends talk for you.
Right, and this president...
Can I call you? If anyone in the future, if anyone ever does...
I will stand up for you.
And you can have them send them my way. I will speak well about you, for sure.
It.
All right, Ed Henry, thank you so much. Directly ahead, North Korea unleashing new threats against the United States. Can the crisis be brought back from the brink? Moments away. Perino in for Bill O'Reilly. And in the Factor follow-up segment tonight, the showdown with North Korea. The rogue state is turning up the temperature yet again as its vice foreign minister threatens to keep conducting missile tests on a weekly basis. As you know, the missile they tested over the weekend failed. And in an interview that aired earlier today, Fox and Friends' Ainsley Earhardt asked the president if the U.S. had anything to do with that failure.
Did we sabotage the North Korea strike?
I don't want to comment on it.
Okay, what happens if North Korea launches another missile?
We'll find out.
All right.
Joining us now to analyze from Los Angeles, Rick Grinnell, former U.S. spokesman to the UN, and from Washington, Jillian Turner, former staffer on the National Security Council. Rick, now that the weekend is behind us and the missile failed to fire, and you have comments from the president and the comments from the vice president, what is North Korea's play next? Like, what do you think, based on your experience, that they will do in the coming days?
Well, first of all, they're looking at 175,000 troops on their border, Chinese troops. So they've gotten the message very loud and clear that something is different, something has changed. I have to go back to that meeting between President Trump and President Xi at Mar-a-Lago, because that to me was a game changer. We saw President Xi leave that meeting, go back to China and really create action, put those troops right on the border. We haven't seen that in a very long time. We haven't seen diplomacy work that fast. And while there's a whole bunch more that needs to be done, I see that as an amazing moment where we finally have China understanding, when they look at President Trump, that this is a credible threat of military action. This isn't just a threat of military action. This is incredibly credible.
Jillian, there have been some changes, but you see some things that kind of look similar. What would that be?
Well, I like to sometimes be a steadying hand and calm people down a little bit. We've definitely reached a kind of rhetorical apex on this issue over the last few days, but tensions between the U.S. and North Korea, as you know, Dana, are not new over their missile defense program. This is really something that's been on the slow burn and alternately kind of boiling and simmering for the better part of 3.5 years now. There's been this kind of covert war going on between the two countries. We didn't hear about it all the time during President Obama's second term, I think on purpose. He didn't want it to be the focus of his foreign policy by any stretch. But he was the one that really started this program, targeting their this electronic cyber warfare program, targeting their missiles at home. And I think we're really seeing a continuation of that, is what we're seeing now.
Rick, what about behind the scenes, maybe at the United Nations? What kind of communication would they be having? Because obviously there's been a lot of activity with the bombing, the Tomahawk missiles in Syria, the Moab in Afghanistan, then activity that happened all in quick succession. And also, I want to ask you both about the fact that we're even talking about our cyber warfare capability. To me seems, I mean, I understand that Ainsley had to ask the question, absolutely, but Rick, isn't it like maybe we shouldn't be talking about this at all?
Well, I think journalists are going to ask, but certainly U.S. government officials should not be talking about it. And I think that the Trump administration has deferred and said no comment. Yeah, they shut it down. But, you know, to go to your point about the UN and Jillian's point, look, I think that the slow burn and all of the resolutions at the UN that have been happening for more than 3.5 years, we have had Security Council action on North Korea for a long time. None of that has worked. The six-party talks have been a total failure. So while all of the diplomats have been kind of talking and putting this on a slow burn through the Obama administration, the North Koreans put a rocket into orbit. What that means is for us here in Los Angeles, there's a very real possibility that if they could just get the other pieces right, which they're testing, they could get all three pieces together, they're going to hit the West Coast, or they can hit the West Coast. That's a scary thought. I think we got to take it seriously, and we need to pressure China to really do something for once.
And it's not just China that is being at least more cooperative, I guess you could say, Jillian. But what about the rest of our allies, Japan and South Korea? What are you hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, President Trump himself brought them up today. It's interesting that Rick mentioned the six-party talks, because as much as that seems kind of like a passé thing, you know, dredging up old foreign policies from the Bush administration, it seems like that's very much in play. His language was very reminiscent of that. He was talking about working in concert with Japan and South Korea and China to hedge against the North's nuclear ambitions. I mean, this is all language we've heard before. Yeah. So it was kind of interesting to see that in the midst of these like very dramatic shows of military force over the last week in Syria and Afghanistan, the degree to which I think the Trump administration is leaning on diplomacy here, because they realize that obviously when it comes to nuclear capabilities, everything is existential.
Rick, if I could throw a last question to you. Ben Rhodes, a former Deputy National Security Advisor for President Obama, tweeted this today: "Every day the situation in North Korea makes clear just how preferable it is to have the Iran deal in place." What do you think of that?
Wow. I mean, it's a crazy analogy to think that somehow the North Koreans are going to all of a sudden give up their ambitions just simply because we're going to give them something. They've made so many promises and broken so many promises in the past. This is not a situation that is even remotely the same.
All right, that's what I thought you might say. Rick, Jillian, thank you so much. And a quick reminder, Bill's new book, Old School: Life in the Sane Lane, is currently #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and you can get it for free. Sign up to become a BillO'Reilly.com premium member, and you get Old School or any of Bill's other big best-selling books as a free gift. When we come back, the Supreme Court ready to hear opening arguments on a landmark religious freedom case. Could Gil Gorsuch tip the balance? We'll have a no-spin preview right after this. The second personal story segment tonight. Two huge issues under review by the Supreme Court. Tomorrow, the High Court will hear oral arguments in a crucial case over religious freedom. And amid that, a major controversy over state executions in Arkansas has fallen at the court's doorstep. Joining us now with more, our in-house Supreme Court expert, Shannon Bream, is in the house.
Expert, I like that.
I've been trying to follow the Arkansas story, but can you sum up what's happening? Because they want executions, but there are court delays, and even there's this question about the actual lethal injection itself.
Yeah, so there are 8 executions scheduled for an 11-day period in Arkansas, and people are like, why the rush? Why this crunch? Well, the fact is there's a cocktail of drugs that they put together to carry out these lethal injections and executions, and one of the drugs is set to expire by the end of April, so they can't use the drug after that point. It's very hard to get your hands on it, and that has been a very smart move by those who are opposing their anti-death penalty. They've gone to these drug manufacturers, pressured them, said, we don't think you should be using these drugs for that. Now the companies have gotten in on saying, we don't want our drugs used for the death penalty, because they are used for other things and treating other things. So without those drugs, they can't carry out these executions.
In many states, there has been a trend away from the death penalty.
Yeah, there has been, and not in Arkansas, though. I mean, they've got 8 of these guys, and these cases are horrific. I've reviewed their case files, and we're talking about heinous crimes. They've been convicted, some of them multiple times. They've had multiple appeals. So, you know, the folks there within the law enforcement community, the governor, the attorney general, I spoke with her yesterday, they say this is a